former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Dare we believe that things might soon return to normal or something approaching normal? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. President Trump makes the announcement everyone's been waiting for, that the country will now slowly, deliberately, state by state, begin a return to normal life after a week where the unemployment rolls over the last month grew to over 20 million people in an economy which was the envy of the world just a few short weeks ago. We'll talk over how and when we can dip our toes back in the water and just how we're going to deal with the growing economic, political, and constitutional fallout from this crisis, as we're joined by LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer, economics correspondent Andrew Moran, and legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What?, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. So, the country just may be on the verge of thinking about creeping toward normalcy.
We are not opening all at once, but one careful step at a time. Governors will be empowered to tailor an approach that meets the diverse circumstances of their own states. Every state is very different. If they need to remain closed, we will allow them to do that. And if they believe it is time to reopen, we will provide them the freedom and guidance to accomplish that task, and very, very quickly, depending on what they want to do.
At last, some light at the end of the tunnel, the recognition that a few states still have a problem with COVID-19, particularly New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, but some 30 states or 60% of the country do not, and the rest fall somewhere in between. But no matter what happens with COVID world, there will be a presidential election in just 6.5 months, and this week, after 28 of the 29 candidates running for the Democratic presidential nomination dropped out, and Joe Biden was left as the last man standing, the man who resuscitated Biden's career from the ash heap finally delivered his endorsement, as if he had any other choice. Barack Obama, who reportedly urged Biden not to run in 2016 or this year, no way to know if the multiple reports to that effect were true or not, did his better late than never on a video like everyone else these days.
If there's one thing we've learned as a country from moments of great crisis, it's that the spirit of looking out for one another can't be restricted to our homes or our workplaces or our neighborhoods or our houses of worship. It also has to be reflected in our national government. The kind of leadership that's guided by knowledge and experience, honesty and humility, empathy and grace. That kind of leadership doesn't just belong in our state capitals and mayor's offices. It belongs in the White House. And that's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States.
So Obama's endorsement is based on character qualities, not policies or ideology or Biden's track record. But Obama did his best to make his former vice president as palatable as possible.
Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made, and he became a close friend. And I believe Joe has all the qualities we need in a president right now. He's someone whose own life has taught him how to persevere, how to bounce back when you've been knocked down. When Joe talks with parents who've lost their jobs, we hear the son of a man who once knew the pain of having to tell his children that he'd lost his. When Joe talks about opportunity for our kids, we hear the young father who took the train home each night so he could tuck his children into bed. And we hear the influence of Jill, a lifelong teacher.
So again, with the personal qualities like empathy and struggling through personal adversity, but nothing about Biden's vision or leadership, which is actually what voters are looking for. Not a kind old grandfather, but a leader. However, no matter whether most of the economy reopens in the next few weeks or not, Trump will have to run on a dismal economy, the polar opposite of what it was just about 6 weeks ago. And if he gets this wrong, it may not matter if Biden is neurologically challenged. But if Trump keeps the corona death toll down, as it appears it is now, and the economy recovers in halfway decent shape in these months leading up to the election, Trump could possibly win a landslide. These days, anything seems possible. Obama's endorsement came after Bernie Sanders waved the final flag of surrender, officially bowing out of the presidential race, and then dutifully endorsing the only candidate left in a split-screen video with the presumptive nominee.
Today, I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe, and I'm speaking just for myself now, is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. A president, and you made this point, who downplayed this pandemic, who ignored the advice that some of his people were giving him.
Again, not exactly a ringing endorsement. I'm supporting you because Trump is evil. Nothing about Biden's policies. To the matter of reopening the country, perhaps the most jolting announcements of all were the complete shutdown of all sports everywhere. March Madness canceled. NBA and NHL suspending their seasons during the height of their drive to the postseason playoffs. And Major League Baseball stopped dead in its tracks just before the start of their season. Here's Major League Commissioner Rob Manfred on Fox Business.
Unfortunately for us, the pandemic struck right at the low point for us, right before we begin our season. It's had really serious impacts on our business. Obviously, 40% of our local revenue is gate and gate related. Obviously, that's all at risk right now. We do have both significant media contracts, both national and local. But at the end of the day, those contracts are dependent on our ability to provide content.
There's been talk of the 2020 Major League season being played entirely in spring training stadiums in Arizona and maybe Florida with no fans. Rob Manfred, the commissioner, says that's one of a number of ideas being kicked around.
We don't have a plan. We have lots of ideas. What ideas come to fruition will depend on what the restrictions are, what the public health situation is. But we are intent on the idea of trying to make baseball part of the recovery, the economic recovery, and sort of a milestone on the return to normalcy.
You may recall that after 9/11, baseball was indeed a big part of our national recovery, culminating with a thrilling World Series between the Yankees and Arizona Diamondbacks. We close with another prominent member of the entertainment industry demonstrating astounding ignorance. Witness Whoopi Goldberg on that bastion of ignorance, The View, speaking about Joe Biden's wife, Dr. Jill Biden, because she got a PhD in education, anointing her as not just a medical doctor, but maybe even the female Dr. Anthony Fauci.
I'm hoping Dr. Jill becomes a Surgeon General, his wife. Because Joe Biden's wife, because he would never do it, but she's a hell of a doctor. She's an amazing doctor.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So the last vestige of a safety net is now gone, and the Democratic Party has its presidential nominee, apparently. With Bernie Sanders meekly bowing out, it looks like a field that contained 29 candidates and proudly boasted of its diversity, with half a dozen women, 4 blacks, 2 Jews, a Hispanic and Asian, a gay man, socialists, quasi-socialists, social justice warriors, climate change activists. It's now produced a presumed nominee who is none of those things, but instead an old white guy who's been a professional politician for half a century and is now clearly neurologically challenged. Joining us to try and figure out how Joe Biden figures to beat Donald Trump is LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer. Welcome back, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, my pleasure, as always. It's been a while, and the world is quite different than the last time we spoke. But, Joe Biden is leading in almost all the polls in a head-to-head matchup with President Trump. The RCP average has Biden leading by between 5 and 6 points on average. Should Trump be alarmed? And how much do these poll results mean, given that we're 6.5 months out from the election and in the middle of a crisis which could end any of 100 ways?
No, I don't think Trump should be alarmed at all. We all learned the value of polls in 2016 anyway, but that's another story. Biden was going to get a bump once the party coalesced around him. He's the presumptive nominee. You get a boost from that. And then the coronavirus just upending everything in American society. I think it's protected him. Yes, I know he's doing his live streams and freezing up and all kinds of disasters, but it's much worse when he's in front of thousands of people doing that.
So, Joe, I wrote after Super Tuesday more than 5 weeks ago that Bernie Sanders should not have quit the race, if only because this virus crisis could entirely change the political landscape. But Bernie went quietly into the night. Did Bernie fail by losing the last 2 primary fights? Or did he win by moving the party so far in the socialist direction that Biden has now embraced many of Bernie's socialist policies?
Well, I think Bernie was right to quit because Bernie didn't want to fight. I think that was clear. There was something wrong all along. We talked about this months ago. The energy that he had in 2016 wasn't there. He often seemed to be going through the motions. He didn't have that spark he had when he was taking on Hillary in the establishment. And he didn't put up a fight at all when the Democratic establishment went after him and coalesced around this completely historically awful candidate in Joe Biden. So having said that, I don't see how you can call him the winner here. To say that they're embracing his policies, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden are going to be the Democratic nominee in the 2 races where Bernie was running for president. You can't get 2 more statist government uniparty figures than that. Yes, the party is more progressive, it's more liberal, but I don't think it's because of Bernie.
Okay, Joe. But on the other hand, at the end of all this, Bernie Sanders has moved the party so far to the left that Joe Biden, of all people, is embracing significant parts of the Green New Deal, for heaven's sake, which wasn't even on the table 4 years ago and is the ultimate radical socialist solution. So, I mean, in that sense, seeing that Bernie apparently wasn't really interested in being president. If he wasn't, he was running to affect policy then, and he certainly has done that.
Well, he's gotten a career swamp establishment politician, as you said in your excellent introduction, to start mouthing the phrases that his supporters like. Is that really winning, or is that just getting someone to say the things that you want him to say with really no hope that they're going to actually implement those policies once they get in office?
Right. So they get the downside of embracing policies that scare the bejesus out of the American people. But the upside is what? If they're not going to implement, they're not going to be implemented. You don't get the upside, and the downside is it's going to scare off voters.
No, that's a good way of saying that. And isn't that a absolute condemnation of Bernie Sanders as a candidate? I mean, that is the ultimate failure. He's made it harder for his party to win. And even if the candidate who was nominated does win, he's not going to get what he says he wants.
Well, you made one mistake in your answer. You said his party, and therein lies the problem. It's not his party, and I don't think he cares about the Democratic Party. In fact, I think he despises the Democratic Party, and I think they despise him because he wants to run for their nomination without becoming a member of the party. I'd be insulted if I was a party leader, wouldn't you?
Well, it would be nice if he'd stop endorsing these people, then, wouldn't you think?
Well, that's true. Good point. But I guess, Eugene Debs isn't running, Joe, so he's got to endorse somebody, I guess. Now, it does seem, Joe, it just seems like the closer we get to the Democratic convention, more and more Democrats are going to get cold feet over Joe Biden for obvious reasons. Do you think there's any realistic chance at this point that the party could panic and turn to Hillary again or Michelle Obama or anyone else?
I think a lot of that depends on what we see from Biden in the coming weeks. Like I said, I think the coronavirus is protecting him from his worst possible outburst in public. But yeah, if he deteriorates, if he keeps making these gaffes, if he keeps being really an untenable candidate, I think they're going to have no choice. I wrote months ago that they should just throw in the towel and go full Oprah and take someone like Michelle Obama, someone who's got that star appeal. I think Hillary's a no-go. Even at this late a date, Hillary's a no-go. They can't feel like she's going to step out and win. Someone like Michelle Obama would be a complete wild card. She'd have that star power that Democrats seem to enjoy. They're looking for a messiah. They're constantly looking for a savior. So that would be an option. But a lot of this is going to be, how bad will Joe Biden get in the next few weeks? A lot of us are expecting him to deteriorate. It depends on how bad it's going to be.
Joe, thanks for joining us. We'll have you back on early and often as we approach the November election, which, lest we forget, is still going to happen, virus or not.
Hi, thanks a lot, Tim.
Joe Schaeffer, political columnist for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we'll be back to try and answer the question, why are markets rallying in the wake of 22 million unemployed?
Where can you find honest political commentary? With sobering analysis.
Even the most trusting among us may find a company's latest plan deeply intrusive.
Accountability.
Perhaps it's time to start asking the right questions.
Deconstructing threats to our liberty.
Unparalleled insight into important stuff.
And boldly reporting the truth. Truth is making a comeback.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Election 2020 Roundtable.
Uprising podcast of LibertyNation.com.
Abortion is functionally sexist.
From my cold, dead hand.
Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Click on youtube.com/LibertyNation.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Why are markets rallying in the wake of millions unemployed? That's the title of a piece by our economic maven at LibertyNation.com, Andrew Moran. The stock market dropped from close to 30,000 down to around 18,000 in the space of just over 5 weeks. That's a loss of 40% in just over a month. Shocking stuff. Tens of billions in lost value. But it's perhaps even more shocking that the market has, over the last 3.5 weeks, recovered half the value it lost. Here to explain it all to us is the man himself, Andrew Moran. How are you, Andrew?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Well, pleasure as always. Let's start with a simple question with likely a complicated answer. How can the market be holding steady when we've seen 22 million people, and that's just the unemployment claims, lose their jobs over the last month?
It's two things. The Fed has unleashed quantitative easing infinity. It's slashed interest rates to zero. Jerome Powell, he said that he's ready to buy anything and everything without a ceiling. The Fed is buying corporate bonds, it's buying junk debt, it's buying ETFs, buying municipal bonds, and everything else under the sun. The only thing that's left now for the central bank is sub-zero interest rates and buying stocks like China, Japan, or Switzerland. So when you have trillions of dollars pumped into the system, you stabilize everything. You give traders enough of a risk appetite to buy and sell. You don't have this chaos. You don't have mass liquidations going on every single day. And then the second issue is that markets are always forward looking. So when you saw that bloodshed that happened, as you just mentioned, it was all pricing in the chaos that was going to occur, that we're seeing right now unfolding. The historic jobless claims, the soon to be double-digit unemployment rate, the depressing earnings seasons. You saw that happen just a few weeks ago when the first initial jobless claims number came in, and I think it was 5 million. It was just a huge spike, and the leading indexes, the Dow Jones, the S&P, they hardly reacted to it. So right now, the markets are just waiting to see if the coronavirus will extend into the summer or autumn. Everything else is just noise now to them.
Now, what's most noticeable to me in recent days, Andrew, is how we're not getting those wild swings in the market we were getting just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Up 1,000, down 1,000. One day it was down almost 3,000. That was truly chilling. Mm-hmm. Is this a sign, this recovery, is this a sign that the financial community is generally very supportive of President Trump's leadership in this crisis? Or is it just bargain hunters, bottom feeders, confidence in the federal bailout package? What?
Yeah, I don't think the market really cares what President Trump is saying right now. I think the only words they want to hear from Trump is that he's reopening the country, or he's going to keep it closed for however long period. So right now, again, it's all about the Fed. Everything else is what you're talking, and of course, everything else you're talking about. Investors searching for bargains and traders getting the bailout money, and airlines or automakers. But overall, it's just the Fed, the $2.3 trillion stimulus the other day, and then the other $2 trillion stimulus, and then the Fed buying all the bonds. It's all Fed intervention. That's everything that's driving this market right now, which is pretty dangerous for when this crisis does end. And then you have the other end of the lockdown, which could be the huge spike in inflation. When you have the Fed printing all this money, the freshly created money goes right to the two main beneficiaries, which are the Congress and the Wall Street. And then eventually, as time goes on, you have the freshly created money going throughout the rest of the system, and then every other American has the depreciated currency buying the highly inflated prices, whether it's the eggs or the stocks or whatever else that's in demand in the market right now. You saw that in the I wrote about in my Swamponomics column the other day about eggs tripling in prices.
Now, Andrew, it's been said often that the market deals well with bull and bear markets. When the market's going up, people are optimistic, and the bear market is going down. They can deal with that, but they can't handle uncertainty. That's the one thing the market cannot bear. To what degree is uncertainty, as opposed to downright fear, driving financial markets these days?
Yeah, in the beginning of March, before the Fed intervened, that was one of the driving factors of the liquidation you saw with all those 1,000-point swings, that there was uncertainty among investors because they heard that the Fed kept saying, like James Bullard, he's the head of the St. Louis Fed branch, and he was talking about how there isn't necessarily a need for the Fed to intervene. And Jerome Powell, he was saying how they're just monitoring the situation. So with all this money that was being pumped into the system, everyone just wanted to dive into the U.S. dollar and get rid of their stocks and their bonds. And they just wanted to hold cash. But now you're seeing more of a certainty factor because the Fed is pumping all this quantitative easing into the system. So this is why a lot of the Wall Street investment houses, they say that once this coronavirus crisis is over, there's going to be this market euphoria that you experienced over the recent years, and that's even more pronounced now. All the Fed intervention is going to be bad for the average American, so there's going to be a massive spike in price inflation. But it's good for everybody else that's connected to the Fed spigot. Wall Street, Congress, Silicon Valley, all those power players.
Well, now you're talking about the eventual unleashing of this pent-up demand. But how quickly, Andrew, can the U.S. really expect to recover from the economic effects of this crisis when almost every other economy in the world, almost all of whom were not in as good shape as the U.S., will experience recession as well?
Well, I think it's going to be tough for the Main Street economy because for a long time, so many businesses and households were already in so much in debt, and they were hardly keeping their heads above water. And then the government, they gave everyone a lifeline, but that money will need to be repaid through higher taxes that eventually is going to happen in order to pay for all the spending that's going on. And then when you have higher taxes, that's going to hinder economic growth. Now, that said, I think that once a lockdown is over, I have faith in American ingenuity. Companies, investors, they're showing that they're coming to the game right now in the middle of a crisis, developing masks and, retooling their operations to help the healthcare workers and help, mitigate this crisis. So I think the U.S. will make do in the meantime and do what they can. The U.S. has done it before, the Great Depression, the stagflation of the 70s, the financial crisis a decade ago. So the U.S. has done it before and will do it again. So, it will eventually be morning in America and then followed by another steep crash. And then hopefully the Fed will just stand by, let the market take care of everything, and then the U.S. would be on a good footing again with all this debt and all this money printing and all this inevitable inflation that's going to happen.
Well, I would welcome, as everybody would, morning in America, Andrew, but I think we'd all settle for just normal life.
Yeah, and I think that, if Joe Biden wins the presidency, if it is morning America, I guess he'll just think it's evening in America because of, his cognitive declines.
Now, Andrew. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. We'll take a quick break and come back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have, finally, reached the ultimate segment of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitle Talkin' Liberty. It's when we reintroduce our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and guardian of individual liberty.
Boom.
Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Tim, guardian of liberty is... To say it's a full-time job in these days is an understatement. The threats are coming fast and furious.
COVID-19 in the courts, and it seems to me that the court's big question these days, Scott, is determining the answer to the question, to paraphrase Bill Clinton in a way, depends what the meaning of essential is, because essential businesses are the only ones that are allowed to continue conducting business in many or most of the states across the country.
Well, the numbers are changing rapidly, Tim, so I wouldn't get too married into that, except to say that they're increasing on an ongoing basis the more that people suffer under the penalty of being subject to one of these orders. And the courts are, being deluged by these types of cases.
What are we learning about how the courts are interpreting the word essential?
Well, the thing is, Tim, all of the different cases involve challenges to the particular state law that has been invoked by the various leadership, the governors, basically, to invoke it. So it means a different thing probably in every single state. And, they haven't worked it all out yet. I can tell you that broadly speaking, the courts have generally been amenable to the shutdown orders. So we've seen some pushback, and we've seen some of the orders be trimmed by the governors themselves when it seemed like they would lose, notably Delaware and Pennsylvania with respect to firearms. But the rest of it, we're going to have to wait and see it shake out, I think.
Well, there's one thing that's been declared a non-essential activity by the Raleigh, North Carolina Police Department, but this non-essential activity, Scott, is included in the Bill of Rights.
Void where prohibited by law, Tim. That was my Bill of Rights T-shirt
Right.
you commented on, I think, last week. The citizens of North Carolina, many citizens of North Carolina, which has not been devastated by COVID-19, like New York City, for instance, have protested the shutting down of the state and said, it's not appropriate for us to lose our freedoms over this threat currently in North Carolina. And part of that protest was, they just like a protest, right? Signs and so forth, protesting the order. In Raleigh, the police threatened to arrest and enforced a ban on it and said that it's a non-essential activity. Tim, the right to gather peaceably, to assemble, to petition the government for redress of grievances is absolutely perhaps one of the core reasons why the country itself was founded. And for the police in Raleigh to be willing to permit all sorts of activity, but not the very, very core of what it means to be a free person as our founders envisioned, it makes the heart ache, I think, Tim, and calls for action.
Well, that is a seeming breach of constitutional rights, but there's another one going on in D.C. where jail inmates with coronavirus have been barred from access to lawyers, their family, showers, changes of clothes, inspectors apparently have determined.
I think that I wanted to talk about this story, Tim, because I think it's an exemplar of what we see in lots of places with jail populations. And, when we as a society throw somebody in a cage, we have a special obligation to those people. And so it's even more important that those people have sort of basic human rights, and also included in those basic human rights are basic constitutional rights, including access to lawyers. Now, access to family, that's a bit rich, I think, for some folks, but the ability to wash and change your clothes and talk to your lawyer is something that every prisoner in the United States must have. Absolutely, undebatable.
Well, good for you for bringing this forward, because inmates are the last people that anybody's worried about these days, but they have constitutional rights too, and those need to be honored as they are for everyone else, even in a time of crisis where morality is sort of a jump ball for a lot of people now.
The punishment of incarceration, Tim, is supposed to be its own punishment, not adding torturous conditions on top of it.
Indeed. Now, Donald Trump has famously, and much to the chagrin or outrage of the left and everybody who hates him, claims total authority to override governors and forcing states to reopen just as he forced them to close. What about this issue of presidential total authority? And I'm putting that in quotations because that's how it has been referred to by the White House.
The president of the United States does not have total authority to override governors. In fact, he has zero authority to override governors. The governor's actions are, to the extent they are, they take place under the rubric of state law, not federal law. The only thing that the president could do, if, for instance, a governor enacted, for instance, like a travel restriction, and the president thought that was a travel restriction that went against people's constitutional rights, they could, just like any other type of instance where that was true, they would sue the state and ask the courts to declare it an inappropriate action and then enforce that judgment from the federal courts. That's the mechanism that we have if the president of the United States, Tim, believes that a state government is acting in contravention of the rights of those citizens.
So this is an issue that will be hotly debated in the days and weeks ahead, maybe
Let's hope it
months.
doesn't need to be litigated.
Indeed. Now, finally, Scott, the more fallout from COVID-19, of course, at the Supreme Court, which will now hear oral arguments by telephone conference and for the first time provide real-time live audio of arguments?
Yeah, so, the court has famously, Tim, never allowed videotape of its proceedings. There's still shots from inside the chambers without people there, but the only photograph, I think, of actual oral arguments has come. It was, surreptitiously taken. So you get the usual court drawings of the old court reporter, the courtroom artist drawings of the justices at work. But because of COVID-19, and that journalists are not going to be able to be at the courthouse to record the goings on, they're going to make this audio available real time for those journalists, and then they will be able to broadcast it live. Now, how it works with the Supreme Court is if you want a journalist's credential to enter that courthouse, and I have gone to apply for that credential, you have to be a major reporter for a major news media outlet. There's only a few passes given because of the limited physical space available in that building. So those networks, we presume, will be broadcasting the proceedings.
How about the Supreme Court docket? Because of coronavirus, when we get to the fall, are they not going to be able to issue judgments on the number of cases they expected, or are a number of them going to get kicked down the road because of this coronavirus?
It's an interesting question we don't yet have an answer to. You also have to throw into that mix, Tim, that Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, certainly had to divide his time to deal with the impeachment proceedings. So we now have had a delay where arguments haven't been made before the court for some weeks. So perhaps they've been able to use that time to kind of catch up on a backlog, and maybe we'll just see going forward. I can tell you this, for all the branches of the government, to say that the Supreme Court is more well suited to operating remotely is an extreme understatement. I don't think this will affect the work of the court in a meaningful way if they don't want it to, because they do have the capacity to work around it.
Well, there's only nine members of the Supreme Court as well. It'd be pretty easy to social distance yourself from 8 other people in the kind of rooms that they have in the Supreme Court, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, but as you might imagine, those people don't work by themselves. They have the support staff and so forth. But to your point, yes, given the comparisons, exceedingly easy compared to Congress or the executive.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with our own Mark Angelides. All of it available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and for heaven's sake, stay healthy. We'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.